There we go. And one other thing to add to bookkeeping, Bruce didn't mention, if you're going to tweet during the speech, if you could drop in the Akron Press Club account name when you do tweet, that would be greatly appreciated. Frank LaRose currently represents Ohio's 27th Senate District, which includes portions of Summit and Stark counties, as well as all of Wayne County. LaRose grew up in Copley Township, where he graduated from Copley High School. He joined the Army, serving in the 101st Airborne Division, and later in the U.S. Special Forces. He received a Bronze Star for his service in Iraq. After serving, LaRose graduated from Ohio State with a Bachelor of Science in Consumer Affairs with a Business Administration minor. He ran for the Ohio Senate in 2010 and was re-elected in 2014. And he and his family now live in Hudson. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Frank LaRose here at the Akron Festival.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks to the Akron Press Club. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And as I was making my way in here, it took me about 20 minutes to get to my table because the room is so full of friendly faces and folks that have been a part of my life. And so I'm not going to try to call out everyone, but I do want to make a few special mentions. One is somebody who's not able to be with us, who's been on my mind the last couple of days, who is a member of the Akron Press family, a man who's like a second father to me, who is a retired photographer from the Akron Beacon Journal. His name is Paul Topol, and I think many of you know Paul. Paul is in Cleveland for surgery today, otherwise he would be here. So please, if you are a person of faith, keep Paul and his family in your prayers, because he needs it, and I'm confident he'll recover, because I know what a strong guy he is. But he was one of the leaders of my Boy Scout troop and was a real inspiration to me growing up. Also, want to point out the person who is my best friend in the whole world, Lauren LaRose, who's here with me this afternoon. Go ahead. When I was serving in the armed forces, I came home from a long deployment and signed up for one of the most contested congressional races in the country. Literally, the day I came home from a year in Iraq, I started working on this very difficult congressional campaign down in Columbus, and she still didn't leave me after that. And then when I had this crazy idea that I wanted to run for public office and pursue that passion, she stuck with me. And then when I decided I wanted to run for Ohio Secretary of State, she was with me all the way. And so not only as the mother of our 3 children and my best friend in the world, but also as my best campaign advisor and best friend, I'm just honored to have you here, Lauren. Thank you so much, baby. So in this room, I don't need to tell all of you who I am. So many of you know me, but by brief introduction, I grew up here in Northeast Ohio. This is home, Summit County, the Akron area, and I've been on the road so much lately. People ask me where I'm from. I tell them I live in my car, but lately that's been the case. But this is where my heart is. That's why when I got out of the service and finished college at Ohio State, I moved back here to Akron, and this was the place where I decided to run for public office. For me, my beginning, though, my first experience with government is thanks to somebody who's sitting here, Township Trustee Helen Humphreys from Copley Township. And when I was in 2nd grade, I found it disturbing that my township didn't have a flag. My country had a flag, my state had a flag, why didn't Copley Township? And so I approached Helen and a couple of the others. In fact, it was Dale Panovich, who was working as the librarian at my elementary school, and she came up with the idea, well, why don't you present a proposal to the Board of Trustees? And so I put on the most official thing that I owned, which was my Boy Scout uniform, Cub Scout uniform at the time, and there was this great article that ran in the Village Views newspaper. I think many of us may remember that, and it showed me passing my plan to the trustees that later resulted in a contest that they held to come up with a township flag and a design. So I sometimes say that Helen, that you got me into this mess by getting me interested in government at an early age. Never forget what small opportunities exist to mentor a young person, and that's what I think the lesson is there. Things that it may seem like just a fleeting opportunity to inspire a young person, you may be profoundly impacting a life. And so any of us that ever have the chance to mentor a young person should take that opportunity. For me, I do a lot of that through the Boy Scouts. That's something that continues to be a big part of my life as an Eagle Scout. I learned a lot through that program and continue to volunteer as a member of the Great Trail Council Board. And out at summer camp, Lauren laughs at me every year when I pull my Boy Scout uniform out and hope that it still fits, and then go out to summer camp to teach Citizenship Merit Badge during the summer, which is always a great pleasure. Speaking of impacting lives, I wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't mention two people here that are saving lives and doing so in a real grassroots way, and that's Tug and Brenda, both involved with Akron Say No to Dope. This is a community response to an issue that has impacted every part of our community. These are people that said, I'm sick of seeing my friends and my friends' children and our neighbors dying from this scourge, and they got involved. They've been down to the State House testifying on behalf of my bill, Senate Bill 1, which is, I believe, slated for passage very soon. I believe will be on the governor's desk this spring, which will be just one small part of the effort, which of course is to crack down on fentanyl traffickers. That's just one small part of it. Prevention is even more important, and treatment is equally important to prevention, and that's something that they're part of. Tug said 600 and something lives that they've saved now through their involvement. 674 lives. If you want to know more about this issue, I'd encourage you to talk to them afterwards. They're involved at the most grassroots of levels. They're talking to addicts on a daily basis and helping them connect with the services that they need, and sometimes just reminding them that their lives are worth living. Because I think, as we've all seen with folks in the grips of addiction, sometimes they get to the point where they don't think their life is worth living, and that's a very dark place to be. And so sometimes it's a simple hug, and telling these folks that their lives are valuable, and we want them to get recovery, and we want them to live. And in Brenda's case, a family tragedy prompted her involvement in this, and so it means a lot. So growing up here in Northeast Ohio, I bring a perspective to the work that I do that was only strengthened by my time in the military. You see, we are parts of a diverse and beautiful community here, and that is the way that I approach my work. When I got to serve in the Army, I remember the drill instructors the drill sergeants had a great way with words, and I remember one of them saying in my first day in basic training that nobody in the Army is black or white or Hispanic or etc. He said, "You're all green," and I remember that it's part of a team. It's and that's the same way that I approach my work in state government. I've been surprised in some of those experiences by how tribal things are in government. And when people approach their work as sort of members of one tribe or the other, I think that they're not doing the work that the taxpayers ask them to do. And what I mean by that is too many of my colleagues view themselves as a member of the elephant tribe or the donkey tribe, and everything begins and ends from that conversation. That's not the way I approach things. I'm a proud Republican. My viewpoint is one of conservatism, but I also believe that statesmen and women solve problems by compromising. That's what you do. Compromise is not a dirty word. I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of the civility efforts that I've engaged in that are very important to me. Now, I also should mention, since this is the press club, that one of the other things that was part of my formative experience was writing a series of columns when I was serving in Kosovo for the Akron Beacon Journal. Some of you may have seen those years ago. This was when email was a very new thing, and I would take these digital photos. It would take 45 minutes to upload them and email them back. That idea came from my friend Paul Topol, who I mentioned earlier. I was sitting on his back porch getting ready to leave for Kosovo, and he said, "You should write me a letter every now and then while you're gone." And I said, "Mr. Topol, so many people have asked me to write them letters. I could spend my whole deployment doing that. I won't have any time to actually complete my mission. I'll be busy writing letters the whole time." I said, "Maybe I should just write one to you and you publish it in the paper." And he said, "Actually, that's a great idea." And he connected me with Lynn Sherwin, I think it was, from the Beacon. And we did this. We ran it through our public affairs officer every time to make sure I wasn't spilling the beans on something that we shouldn't be talking about. They were mostly human interest stories, talking about being out there playing soccer with the kids in Kosovo, talking about the landmine removal work that we were doing, for example, or the effort that we put together to gather coats and shoes for the people of these little villages that we would encounter in Kosovo. I mean, those for me were stories that needed to be told. And so all of you, as folks that support the Akron Press Club, and those of you that work in journalism, thank you for the work you do. I will tell you that as a person who believes in the Constitution, that means you believe in every part of the Constitution, and for me, there's a reason why the First Amendment is first. All of you that are in the profession of journalism are in an honorable profession. I think that there have been too many people that have spent their time trying to tear down or degrade the men and women who work in journalism. Now, are there bad apples in every bunch? Sure. We know that. And there are some that try to put a personal bias into their reporting and pass it off as objective. And we all know about that. But the vast majority of people that I know who work in journalism are honorable people that try to tell the story. And so to each and every one of you that are part of that work, thank you for what you do. So why am I running? My goal is to serve as Ohio's Chief Elections Officer and Ohio's Secretary of State because I believe in the two things that the office does. The two main functions of the Office of Secretary of State, as I like to say, are some of the things that have made our country and our state the great place that it is, and that's free elections and free markets. The free elections side of it is well known. All of you are familiar with the fact that the Ohio Secretary of State is the Chief Elections Officer for Ohio and has that sacred responsibility of maintaining accurate and accessible elections for the people of Ohio. The free market side of it is, of course, the business filing side of the office. Any new business starts at the Ohio Secretary of State's office. That's where they go to begin that journey as an entrepreneur. That, to me, is inspiring. My family came to this country 100 years ago with a dream and a work ethic, and here in America, specifically in Akron, is where they found their American dream as entrepreneurs, starting a business that grew and became successful. They did that by carrying out their God-given potential and working hard and putting other people to work in the process. And that, to me, is something worth celebrating. And so as the person that will be establishing every new company, or working with every new company, and also protecting the ability to cast a ballot, these are things that inspire me. I served in the armed forces for 10 years, as you know, and I get to see people vote for the first time in places like Kosovo. I was there in Iraq as they were carrying out their first national election, and you'll never forget when you see someone vote for the first time, particularly when you see someone risk their lives to cast a ballot. We remember the purple fingers from Iraq. People would come out of the polling places and hold those purple fingers in the air. It was a real badge of honor for them, for these Iraqi men and women. And this is men and women that were able to participate in the election in Iraq, in a country that, to say the least, doesn't have a rich history of women's rights. And these folks were proud of that. They were proud of that purple finger. Of course, it was a simple anti-fraud technique that they used. They didn't have voter lists or IDs or other methods for keeping people from voting twice, and so they dipped your finger in ink. If you had purple ink on your finger, it lasted for about 2 days, then you couldn't vote a second time. But it also became a real badge of distinction for them. But what a lot of people don't realize is what an act of courage it was. You see, these Iraqi men and women were defying the terrorists, the bad guys that we were up against in southern Iraq, who said that it was un-Islamic to vote. Of course, that's not true, nothing true about that. And they said that if you were caught voting, or if you had purple ink on your finger, they would cut your finger off. These were some of the threats that were being put out there. There were posters and word of mouth and even social media posts talking about that. Well, these individuals defied that and showed up at over 70% to vote. We don't very often get a 70% voter turnout, and nobody cuts fingers off in Summit County or threatens to do so. These people defied death and defied dismemberment because they recognized something that too many of us have started to take for granted. That is, the difference between a citizen and a subject is the ability to vote. To me, that's an important thing. Anybody that's ever raised children knows that one of the first instincts a child has is to exert their own will, right? I think my daughters, one of the first words they each learned was no, and it's accompanied by this little thing that they do. That's an early human instinct. Nobody wants to be told what to do. Nobody wants to have someone else telling them how to live their lives. And the way that we do that in our form of government, the way that we exert our will, is through the power of the vote. What a remarkable thing. And in all of human history, what a rare thing. Think about this, 240 years or so that we've existed as a country. It's been for less than 100 years, in fact, it's been 98 years that women have had the right to vote. We will be celebrating in 2 years the centenary of women's suffrage. We need to be talking about that. We need to be talking about what a precious thing this is that people fought for, that we have. We've got folks here from the League of Women Voters that know exactly how precious that is. They're involved in these discussions about how Ohio is going to mark the centenary of women's suffrage. It was around about 60, 70 years ago in this country that we finally started to move beyond the old problems that we had, where in big parts of this country, thankfully not so much in Ohio, but large parts of this country, people were systematically prevented from voting because of the color of their skin. We know that. We need to recognize that. We need to commit ourselves to never repeating those mistakes. And so let's say for 60 years, 70 years, in all of human history, there's been the ability to vote here in the United States, regardless of gender, regardless of skin color. That's worth celebrating. And it's easier to vote now than it's ever been in our history. Let that sink in for a second. The ability to vote is accessible by more people than has ever been in all of our history. But we still see, in many cases, low participation. That's something that we all should work on. That's something that we should all be committed to. I know I am. This is something that I want to see improved. I want to see people excited about elections. I want to see people fired up about the ability to, as I say, overthrow the government. Here's a story that I tell college students a lot of times when I speak. I talk about when I was in the armed forces and I filled out the secret security clearance paperwork. And there's all these yes and no questions, pages of them. One of the questions on there is, have you ever plotted the overthrow of the government? It seems kind of like an odd question, but maybe an appropriate question to ask somebody that's seeking a secret security clearance. It's kind of like the question at the airport, do you have a bomb? You wonder how many people have answered that question in the affirmative. But if you think about it this way, of course I answered no, because I knew the answer they were looking for. They were asking, are you part of some terrorist cabal, or are you part of some plot to overthrow the government? But think about this. Any of us that have ever run for office, circulated a petition, donated to a candidate, served in a party office, voted, knocked on doors for a candidate, any involvement, isn't that what we do at an election? Don't we plot the overthrow, the peaceful overthrow of the government? Isn't that what we can do? We can kick out old leaders and bring in new leaders using the power of the ballot instead of the bullet. That's a remarkable thing. And again, in all of human history, the way that you became the person in charge is by having tougher dudes on horseback and swords and cannons and this kind of thing. We now, for about the last 240 years, have the ability to overthrow the government peacefully and bring in new leaders using the power of the ballot. That's a remarkable thing. This is something worth fighting for. This is something worth preserving. This is why I'm running for this office. Now, we've made some good progress in Ohio, but there is more to do. I'm working right now on trying to bring about funding for new voting machines in Ohio. I've proposed $114.5 million for that next generation of voting machines. We've got a whole set of voting machines in Ohio that are in need of replacement. Many of these were bought during the HAVA funding that we received in 2004 and 5. So it's time to modernize that generation of voting machines. And by the way, the folks that actually run voting in our state and in our country are our county boards of elections. Anybody that has been involved in elections knows how hard they work, but as I like to say, the folks at our county boards of elections make it look too easy. Back during the Winter Olympics a couple weeks ago, I would say they were like figure skaters, and I would get blank stares from people sometimes. The figure skaters, the pros, the professionals at anything are people that make it look easy, right? Our elections officials make it look easy. They show up before the sun comes up. They run elections all day, very long day. They get the results out to us by 9, 10 o'clock at night. I mean, what a minor miracle that is. And those folks that make that happen are worthy of our praise. What we have is the envy of the world. Our elections run more smoothly and more efficiently than any place on earth. That is why just last year, 2 years ago, 2016, we had people from all over the world that came to Ohio to observe the process and take those tips back to their home countries. But we've got work to do to modernize that, and part of that is that next generation of new voting machines. And so modernization is something that I've really focused on. One thing that I was able to do a couple years ago was get a bill passed that brings online voter registration to Ohio. So now, every Ohioan, once you turn 18, can use their smartphone or their computer at home or their computer at the library to register to vote. Now, of course, if you still want to use the paper format, you can still choose to do that. But that's a convenience that is a good step forward for Ohio. New voting machines, online registration. Some of the modernization that's been done at the Secretary's office as well has been a great step forward as far as business filings. A lot of that is now done using the computer, and that's a great thing. I talked about encouraging entrepreneurship and supporting small business. I think that we should celebrate entrepreneurship as a culture and as a country and as a state. We've got leaders from academia here, both from the University of Akron and from Stark State, that are producing that next generation of entrepreneurs and innovators that are going to work in big companies, and some will start their own companies. We need to make sure that Ohio gives them a bear hug and embraces them and keeps them here. And the Secretary of State's office has a small role to play in that. We've reduced the cost of starting a new business in Ohio. It's now $99, and I was a co-sponsor of the bill that did that. We are among the lowest cost in the nation. We're certainly the lowest cost in the Midwest. Again, it's about streamlining that process and making it easier for people to start a business. Redistricting. I think that everybody in this room is familiar with exactly how impactful redistricting is. Although sometimes when I speak to groups of people, I have to start off by explaining it. And I know sometimes this can be a bit of a boring subject, but it's something I just love. The redistricting reform issue has been kind of my thing going back to 2010 when I first ran for the state senate. And I tell the story, a couple of years ago, my wife had heard my redistricting speech so many times and thought that it was so boring. One of our children was upstairs crying, and Lauren had been up a couple times to try to put her back to sleep, and so she turned to me and said, "All right, it's your turn, go up there and put her to sleep." And as I'm creeping up the stairs, Lauren says, "Talk to her about redistricting." I don't think it's boring. I think it has a huge impact on the way our state and our federal legislatures work. And the fact is this: the process that's been in place for a long time currently is a winner-take-all proposition. If you are in control of the pen, you get to draw lines as you see fit, and usually you draw lines to benefit your party. Both parties have engaged in that process. This is something that is sort of well known. And gerrymandering, or gerrymandering as it should properly be called, is over 200 years old. 1812 was when Elbridge Gerry, the governor of Massachusetts, drew a district to benefit his party. It looked like a salamander, and it was a newspaper man from the Boston Globe, I think it was a Boston newspaper, that came up with the term gerrymander. A district that Gerry drew that looked like a salamander, and they poked fun at the governor this way. It's only gotten worse. And what I mean by that is with modern GIS technology, pinpoint accurate polling, you can draw districts that perfectly benefit one party or the other. I mean, it's gotten very sophisticated. And again, either party that engages in that process is incentivized to use the ability to draw districts that benefit themselves. And they have. The problem is that the voters of Ohio overwhelmingly have told us for a long time that this process needs to be improved. This issue consistently polls in the 70s. People, if you ask them the question, should we change the way that state legislative and congressional districts are drawn, repeatedly say we absolutely should, and that they don't like the winner-take-all proposition that currently exists. And so it's a challenge. And although I've been talking about this for years, it took a group of engaged and active citizens to really make this happen. As is so often the case with any big change in our country, it's a group of citizens that get involved and hold the politicians accountable and hold their feet to the fire and get us off our collective behinds to get something done. And in this case, it was a coalition of folks led by the League of Women Voters and many others that circulated petitions and got things done and got other people at the State House finally talking about this. As a result, we did something pretty historic. We passed bipartisan redistricting reform. Republicans and Democrats actually came together to agree on this very contentious, very high-stakes issue. Now, all along, I've been asked the question for years on radio shows and newspaper interviews and that kind of thing. Why would you want to mess with this? Shouldn't you leave well enough alone? This process has worked pretty well for your party for the last 2 decades. Why would you want to change it? Well, the honest answer is that what matters to me is not what's good for one party or the other, but what's best for the strength and vitality of our democracy. And furthermore, I view this as tough love. I believe my party will win elections because we have better ideas for governing, because we have stronger candidates, not because, in a sustainable way anyway, not because we draw creative district lines. I think that a sustainable party is one that wins on its merits. And I believe that my party can and will. And that's why I've been a longtime supporter of redistricting reform. So what did we come up with? Quite simply, we came up, not simply, it's a complex process, I'll be very honest with you, but it's a 3-step process. The congressional redistricting issue that you're going to see as issue 1 in front of you in just a couple weeks now starts with the state legislature, requires a 3/5 vote in order to pass lines, including at least half of the minority. If they fail to do it, then it goes to the redistricting commission, which includes 7 members, including the Secretary of State. They have to get 4 votes out of the 7, including at least 2 members of the minority party, to pass a 10-year map. If they fail to do that, and by the way, if they fail to do that, it'll be up to all of you to hold them accountable for that failure, because it will be a failure if they don't get it done. Then it goes back to the legislature for one more try. The threshold is reduced. It goes down to, it's still 3/5, but it's only 1/3 of the minority members have to approve the map. And if they fail to do that, then they can pass district lines with simply a majority vote, but new restrictions sort of pop into place that are meant to constrain party excess, that are meant to require better compactness, sort of less of the funny looking districts that you see. And so if a map is passed with only majority support, they will do so in a much more constrained environment as far as what rules they have to follow. But also, those maps will only be in effect for 4 years, and so they'll be taking a big risk. What they'll be doing is taking a risk that they will not still be in charge, or that they will still be in charge 4 years hence when the next set of maps get drawn. Again, there's no perfect process for redistricting reform. What we have in issue 1 is a balanced proposal that compels statesmen and women to come to the table and compromise, get things done, work together. That's not easy, especially given what a high stakes process this is, and what a impactful process it is for both parties. But I believe that issue 1 will be successful, and I believe that when we pass new maps in 2021, having a much better process in place will yield a better effort, but it will ultimately be up to the citizens of Ohio to hold those map makers responsible. Let me conclude on this. I've worked a lot on the citizenship, on the civility issue rather. Many of you heard the talk that I gave a couple years ago at the Akron Roundtable with my friend Ted Celeste, who served with me in the House of Representatives when I was in the Senate. Many of you know that I worked very closely with Senator Tom Sawyer from the Akron area on the redistricting issue. These relationships evolved into a project that we've been working on to try to increase civility. And briefly, this is something that it's a problem that's never finally solved. It's kind of like saying, I want to address hunger, like our friends at the food bank do. It's like saying, I want to address peace. It's something that there will always be more to do. But civility is something that's worth working on. I think we can all agree that this is a challenge that our generation faces. To improve the civil discourse. Groups like this are responsible for helping to guide the community in that direction. And civility is not just simply being nicer to each other. That would make for a nicer work environment. It would be better to go to work as a public official if everybody was just nicer, but it's about so much more than that. Civility is about solving problems on behalf of our constituents. And the fact is that when people are not civil to one another, then there's no space for dialogue. When there's no space for dialogue, there's no space for compromise and problem solving. And so civility is about doing our job as public officials better and trying to bring a balanced approach to things. In that regard, I've worked with the National Institute on Civil Discourse, traveled all around the country, and offered workshops in other states where we work with state legislators in other parts of the country to help them improve the civil discourse in their communities. This is something that I'm passionate about and something that I want to continue working on and will continue working on as Ohio's next Secretary of State. The office, because of the elevated role that Ohio has in national elections, is often the target of litigation. And I'm not naive in that I think that I would be able to end that entirely. But I do believe that through dialogue and conversation, that we can solve problems more often than not without taking them to that next step of litigation. I believe that more often than not we agree on more than we disagree on, and people of good faith, assuming that people are trying to get something reasonable accomplished, can sit down and resolve their issues. I think that turning down the heat on some of the rhetoric that exists around elections is important. I think that both parties have a role to play in this very candidly. I think that there's one party that tends to overstate the existence of fraud, and there's one party that tends to overstate the existence of suppression. Both of these are serious issues, and even one instance of either is one too many, right? If one person is prevented from voting, then that's too much. If one person commits fraud, then that is more than any of us want to tolerate. But at the same time, we can work together to address these problems in a way that preserve the integrity of our elections and also maintain access to every eligible Ohioan. Again, reasonable people can work through problems like this, but we need to be careful about how we talk about elections, because one of the most important things we can do is maintain the confidence that people have. Every American, every Ohioan should be confident that their vote is accurately tallied and reflected in the results they see on election day. That is something that I would stand by and will continue to stand by. And so every Ohioan should feel confident that they should be going and casting a ballot and being involved. The entire underpinning of our system of government relies on this. Every citizen needs to know that when they cast a vote, that is reflected in the result that they see. And those are important things for us to continue to talk about. Now, can there be improvements? Absolutely. And in our 240 years of history, we've continuously made our elections better, more accessible, more fair, as I talked about earlier. But nobody should overstate the existence of either fraud or suppression, because I think what it does is undermines the confidence that voters have. I'm working very hard to win the opportunity to serve as Ohio's next Secretary of State, and I ask for your support in that endeavor. I will certainly work my tail off to make you proud as a hometown guy from Akron, Ohio in that regard, and I look forward to the questions that you may have. Thank you so much.